This is actually our third episode of the public webinar. Our other two episodes were too successful, and so that's kind of why we had to switch platforms here. On the show, we do aim to give you a look into organizations that are tackling the crisis of abortion. We want to help you learn from them and critically think about what it means to be pro-life in Canada today. We are a pro-life organization. I apologize if that's a surprise to you. We want every person in Canada to reject abortion, and so hopefully this show will inspire you and equip you to do just that. Throughout the show, you will have the opportunity to submit questions on the public chat, so write those out. We will start taking public questions about halfway through the show, so make sure you give us some good ones to ask. And of course, it's on the chat where we've already seen some activity. That's where you want to put your questions. Those will be funneled to me, and I will have the opportunity to ask them to our guest. My name is Ben Matichuk, and it is my pleasure to represent the National Campus Life Network as the regional coordinator of Alberta. And today's host, we are proud and excited about what we get to do nationally, which is work with 21 clubs and over 200 youth across Canada to fight the greatest human rights injustice of our time. And you can find out more about what we do at ncln.ca. Now, getting into this episode here, of course, everybody in the pro-life movement agrees on everything always. Of course, we all know that. Let's pretend, however, for a second that they did not. And if that were the case, it would probably be on abortion victim photography, also known as graphic images. Now, I have done activism both with very visible graphic images and then also with graphic images that were far less apparent. So the experience was indeed quite different. I suppose there are those who say that these images have no place in the pro-life movement, that graphic images really have no place in the pro-life movement. There are certainly some who feel that way. And there are others who advocate for the use of graphic images and use them liberally, one of whom is today's guest, who, for those of you who don't know, is Cam Côté. So Cam has been involved in the pro-life movement for over a decade, beginning in 2009 at the University of Victoria, where he first was exposed to the reality of abortion. After watching a graphic video of abortion, his involvement began and led to his serving as the Secretary of Youth Protecting Youth, the pro-life club at UVic, and choice chain activism with the Centre for Bioethical Reform in BC in 2010. Later in that school year, in February of 2011, Cam participated in the Abortion Awareness Project in Florida, also known as AAP. In 4 days, he spoke with countless subjects and had the opportunity to witness dozens of students deciding to reject abortion and embrace the pro-life position. Since that time, Cam spent 2 years as the Vice President of Youth Protecting Youth, and in 2011 helped bring Choice Chain to the UVic campus for the first time. He participated in AAP again in 2012 and was an intern with CCBR in the summer of 2012, where he participated in the New Abortion Caravan, traveling from Vancouver to Ottawa, exposing the injustice of abortion. Cam is a graduate of the University of Victoria and holds a degree in biology. He now operates as CCBR's Western Outreach Director in Calgary. Now, I first spoke with Cam when we were corresponding regarding NCLN's involvement in the National Pro-Life Conference in Calgary in November. And I believe we first met in person in the bathroom of that hotel, shaking hands directly after washing them, which makes us obviously really good examples and has since created an unbreakable bond between us. Cam, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Ben. Super happy to be here.
Now, we're gonna obviously, graphic imagery is, of course, what we're talking about today. I first sort of want to touch on your journey into the pro-life movement, and kind of the first thing that sticks out to me is, Cam, I understand you're a Flames fan, but you graduated from UVic. So can you take me through your origin a little bit?
Oh man, it was a long journey to become a Flames fan. As I'm sure you can imagine, growing up in Victoria, I was a diehard Vancouver Canucks fan for the longest time. Cut my teeth on the Russian Rocket, Pavel Bure and Captain Kirk McLean, the glory days of Naslin and Bertuzzi and Morrison and Matthias Olin and all those names. But I just kind of embraced that Vancouver wasn't going to go anywhere because they won the President's Trophy year after year, and they always lost to San Jose in the playoffs or the Kings or somebody. And then in 2011, they finally made it to the big dance, and it looked like they were actually going to go all the way, and then it got completely corrupted, and Colin Campbell completely ruined everything, and the Canucks lost in 2011. I stopped watching hockey for 2-3 years. I moved to Calgary, and then I couldn't handle any of the music stations here in Calgary, and so I just listened to sports talk radio. And over the last 5 years since then, I've gradually learned more and more about the Flames and have become a true Canadian Calgary Flames fan. It's true. And yet there's a lot that we have in common. I think, Ben, as an Oilers fan, we can both look at how much of a dumpster fire Ottawa is. And you know what, even if teams aren't making the playoffs, even if we're having struggles in the first round, losing 5 games to the Avalanche, even if Edmonton had to pick up 5 first-round picks in the last 10 years, we can still look at Ottawa and have a smile on our face.
And, you know, obviously I do apologize to any Senators fans who are here. I apologize that you cheer for the Senators. Like we can't even trash talk you because we just say like you cheer for the Senators, and they have been such a mess to the point that I genuinely feel bad for them. Now, so I appreciate you taking me through that journey. I didn't actually know that you were, a floor crosser, so to speak.
Yeah, it happened.
I don't know how you feel about that term, but with that, I guess we'll get into the more serious questions. So, of course, Western Outreach Director, CCBR, you guys use AVP, the abortion victim photography, very freely. What is the goal, you would say, of Choice Chain, your activism project?
Definitely Choice Chain being our core activism project, where we're showing the truth about what abortion does to preborn children, coupling that with conversations with passersby. Our goal is to change minds and save lives. Just like NCLN and just like the pro-life movement as a whole, our goal isn't simply to oppose abortion or defend life. Our goal is to make abortion unthinkable. Our goal is to make Canada into a country which thoroughly and absolutely rejects abortion as the human rights violation as it is. And we realize the incredible power that visual evidence has in breaking down the barriers, dispersing the cloud of rhetoric that surrounds the abortion debate, and just going straight to the evidence that abortion is a human rights violation.
Sorry about that. Obviously, this is kind of the, you know, for those of you who are attending who don't know, this is kind of the, I guess, giving Cam the opportunity to make the case for graphic images for abortion victim photography. Now, this is a question I'm going to ask you. This is a question that I myself would actually answer yes to. As a Catholic, of course, do you see biblical justification for using AVP?
So first thing I think is important to clarify is that CCBR is a non-sectarian organization, that we're not requiring people to be Christian in any capacity. We're not requiring anybody to have any faith. We don't think that you need to have a particular faith to recognize abortion as a human rights violation. That said, we recognize that a ton of people who are pro-life realize that not only is abortion a human rights violation, but we got to do something about it. And I would say that there's ample evidence throughout the Bible, throughout our Christian history over the last 2,000 years of not only direct action, challenging people with the very hard truth that injustice is happening. Whether, I'm not going to say that Jesus spent his entire time flipping tables, because that wasn't exclusively his ministry, but I think it's really important to recognize that he called a spade a spade. He said things like they were. Not only him, the early Christians, the apostles, in Paul and Peter, preaching Christ crucified, recognizing that this, yes, Christ is risen from the dead, but Christ was crucified by you, the people, and you need to repent and you need to come to Christ. And we see as well in Ephesians 5:11 that we're called not only to avoid the deeds of darkness, but indeed to expose them. And so we think that there is very good biblical evidence that it's appropriate to act directly with regards to injustice that's going on. And the other thing that we have to bear in mind is that abortion victim photography is not the first time victim imagery has been used. That obviously this has been used throughout history for the last 200 years by every single successful social reform movement. Victim imagery has played a pivotal role in catalyzing change in society. And so if it was Christian enough for Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., if it was Christian enough for those who fought against injustice of slavery and the slave trade, if it was Christian enough for so many incredible heroes who have come before us, then I think that we need to be asking, not is it convenient, but is it compelling in bringing about what Christians ought to be striving for, justice for all mankind.
Now, we of course have experienced many students in our movement who have a problem with AVP because I get it. The justification is like, look, this is ugly, and when we use this stuff, we are associated with something that is ugly. So, to the people in the pro life movement who say, I don't like these images and I don't want them part of my movement, what's your response to them?
I mean, I can certainly recognize the natural desire to be appreciated, to be liked, to be viewed positively, all that sort of thing. I think that it's important to recognize um, that what is our goal as pro-life activists? Not only did I mention before that our goal is to make abortion unthinkable, my colleague and friend Blaise Lane puts it really well that for a long time we've pursued a theory of action as opposed to a theory of change. We've talked about, you know what, growing our membership, growing our numbers, and just doing stuff, being active, being visible, and being able to check off that pro-life box of yes, we are doing something, and the act is what's important and not what the act is achieving. And we try to pursue a theory of change, looking at what is our goal. Our goal is to change society. And to do that, society needs to know the truth. Certainly that truth needs to be shared in love. And we have an awful lot of training on how to do that. Obviously, not everyone shares AVP appropriately. We have a very thorough training protocol that everyone has to go through, a code of conduct release that everyone has to do. But I would challenge people with what is the most important thing for your pro-life group? Is it having more members or is it saving babies? Because the evidence is very clear that abortion victim photography saves babies. It changes minds and it turns people away from abortion. And I'd say that that is actually what often draws people towards the movement. I get asked all the time by other pro-life organizations why there's so many young people involved with CCBR. And for anyone who's been to our website or our social media, certainly before this COVID pandemic outbreak, we're terrible. Our website just got updated. Blaise, thank you for updating our website. Our social media, our stuff was not hip. Our stuff was not good messaging to young people. Young people were attracted to the movement because, or to the organization, because minds were being changed and lives were being saved. And if that's the goal of your group, I would strongly encourage you to consider incorporating AVP into your action so that your action achieves change.
Now, I guess I want to flip back to the church, to the sort of the church angle a little bit. Do you from churches, I guess in Calgary and elsewhere, from dioceses, whatever the plural of that is? I'm not Catholic, so I don't know. Do you get a lot of cooperation from them, even with the graphic imagery?
We are getting more and more support. I think it's important that you had mentioned that there's a lot of students that are kind of on the fence. From the time that I got involved 10 years ago to now, there's been an overwhelming shift in the vast majority of people now, not only individuals, but groups and churches and dioceses coming on board, realizing that AVP is appropriate when conducted appropriately, and it changes minds. And so we are seeing more and more partnership between Christians as individuals, between churches and dioceses. We have more and more groups that are embracing our pro-life study series, a 5-part video series that my colleague Rachel put together specifically for mobilizing Christian people in the pro-life movement. We are getting a lot more buy-in, a lot more interest, and a lot more partnership with different Christian churches, for sure.
Now, what do you see as the reason for, because obviously you have people who change their opinions all the time, and so for those who you have met who have initially said to you, I reject AVP totally, what has it usually been that's brought them to the other side to say, I actually see the necessity of these images?
I mean, certainly we're open to having a conversation with them. One resource I want to share with everybody is the Seeing is Believing book by my colleague Jonathan Van Maren, a great resource to walk all the way through it. But by and large, it is the evidence. By and large, when people go to our Facebook page and social media platforms, when people go to our activism and just observe our activism, they realize that people change their mind when they come in face to face with the reality. When people see that this isn't a theoretical clump of cells, this isn't a debate steeped in rhetoric, but like there's a picture of a human being who's been ripped apart. There's very little that you can do to argue against that. And so when they see the evidence and they realize, this is actually changing more minds than what I'm currently doing. They're drawn to it. And by coupling that evidence with the explanation and how we go about conducting our strategy, where, when, how we conduct our projects, people realize that we're not flippant about how we do these projects. We're very, very methodical. And because of that, we achieve results time and time again.
How do you measure that? Like, so the effectiveness of the images, what data are you leaning on to show you that these images really do play a big role in shifting the opinion in this culture on abortion?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, we have the anecdotal evidence. We have a huge team of volunteers and interns and community group leaders, some of whom are on this call right now, staff members who have conversations with people day in and day out. And those people say, hey, I've never thought about it that way before. I never realized that that's what abortion looked like. I never realized that an 8-week-old embryo has fingers and toes and intestines and brains and all that kind of stuff. Like, I never realized any of that, and that clarifies a lot of stuff for me. So the anecdotal evidence is certainly the most exciting for a lot of people, because they see people changing their minds without having changed the arguments at all. It's simply cutting through a lot of the rhetoric, like I mentioned. But not only that, we've got the statistical evidence that we hired a third-party polling company that has done polling for various federal governments and other agencies and whatnot. We hired them to do polling before and after we did one of our postcard delivery blasts. So these are people who never even had a conversation with somebody about abortion. They're people who just received the image, viewed the image, and then they were polled on the impact of that image. And we saw that 67% of people who viewed abortion victims felt more negatively after than before. And they were willing to say that to a random person doing a polling call, that there were less than 9% of people who claimed that they felt more supportive of abortion. And 67% of people who were willing to admit, yeah, no, I feel worse about abortion now than I did before. And that the coverage between the overlap between those who feel negatively in any way about abortion and those who want some form of legal restriction on abortion is over 90%. And so these images achieve the goal of walking people towards the pro-life position in an incredibly effective and incredibly efficient manner.
Now, thank you for sharing that. And of course, that's how we quantify it. Last sort of question for you here before we move to public questions, and I do see those coming in, so definitely keep those coming, everybody who's been submitting questions. Cam, what about you? When you first saw abortion victim photography, what was your reaction, and what role did these images play in getting you yourself involved in the pro-life movement?
Honestly, it blew my mind. So I got involved in YPY, the Pro-Life Club at UVic, shortly before Stephanie Gray, the then executive director for CCBR, came and did a public debate with a philosophy professor, Dr. Ike Kluge. And they actually had to break the debate into 2 separate sections because so many people came to attend. And I missed the first section, and I stood there waiting outside to get into the second section for about an hour and a half. And I was debating or having a conversation with 3 or 4 ladies about abortion. And I was pretty comfortable with the different arguments. I walked through the sled analogies, and I walked through trotting up a toddler, and I did all this stuff that I've been trained to do to very little success. I went into that debate, and Stephanie showed a 2-minute video showing what abortion did to a preborn child. And those 3 girls that I've been talking to, their jaws dropped. They put down their signs and they walked out. So many other people wrote on their evaluations for the presentation that they had changed their mind. And I realized that more was accomplished in 2 minutes of showing the reality than in an hour and a half of me trying to debate them into the pro-life position. And it was because the victims were able to speak for themselves. It was because the evidence was provided instead of this long convoluted argument. It was just, okay, that's a picture of a human being who's been killed, and it's wrong to kill human beings.
Well, yeah, thanks for taking us through that. And from there, we're going to move into some submitted questions. And this first one comes from Lily. So she says, one of my concerns and hesitations with AVP is that the pro-life movement will be seen as aggressive and uncharitable, and that will result in people being more inclined to dismiss our message. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I can certainly appreciate the position, and that's arguably part of what I felt before I got involved with CCBR, that if the pro-life movement is going to win, we have to attract bees with honey and not with vinegar. And yet we see time and again, if we do research into the history of social reform, if we look at what has worked for other groups, we realize that it wasn't eloquent speeches from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial that changed people's minds. It was seeing pictures of Emmett Till brutally battered at his open casket funeral. It was seeing people attacked by dogs and water hoses at public protest. It was seeing the reality of injustice. And so at the end of the day, I know that I'm not making a ton of friends by doing what I'm doing. I know that I'm probably not even increasing membership in pro-life groups initially. And yet what I do know that I'm doing is changing minds and saving lives. And there have been tons of people who have told us, you know what, when I first saw your images, I hated you. And then it kind of wore on me. And I realized that you're out here because you are urgently trying to defend the weakest and most vulnerable. And that takes guts. It takes guts to put your personal reputation, your personal kind of social life on the line and say, you know what, I'm not worried about the impact on me. I'm worried about abortion's impact on preborn children. We have to remember that the pro-life movement doesn't belong to you and me, Ben. The pro-life movement belongs to preborn children. We're just vessels that are trying to help them. We're not in this for our personal gain or benefit. We're in this to help children not be killed by abortion.
I have another question from Mark, who's basically asking, what resources can CCBR give that do, show the evidence and the data that we've been discussing that AVP is effective?
Totally. So first resource, this one right here, Seeing is Believing. You can buy it on Lifecycle Books. You can buy it on the Bridgehead. It's a great and thorough resource that walks through, like I said, the history of social reform, walks through the anecdotal evidence that we're seeing right now, and the statistical evidence demonstrating that abortion victim photography is the most effective tool that we have at our disposal. So I would definitely say that. And then I would just encourage you to check out CCBR social media platforms that show the evidence of people coming around who never thought they had. The number of people who have been working for Planned Parenthood, who have talked to us at our Florida displays, people who have been working for the student union or volunteering for different reproductive rights groups on campus. And they come, they talk to us, they see the pictures, and they change their mind and they leave their membership in those groups. I think the evidence speaks for itself. And so checking out the evidence, learning about the groups that are active in your area, joining them, and just seeing how things are going. And remembering that at the end of the day, people may not walk away remembering all of the sophisticated arguments and apologetics tools that I convey to them, but they're going to remember those pictures because we're visual learners, and they're going to remember how they're treated, which is why we're so intentional about making sure that all of our team members, anybody who represents CCBR in any way, goes through thorough training to make sure they're conducting themselves in the most professional and most appropriate way possible.
Now, touching on that exact, principle to be kind of, which we should all adhere to. This question comes from Lois. Cam, you mentioned that the truth needs to be, presented in love. I've heard a lot of people criticizing the use of images, although if we were to show it with their consent, then usually there aren't any problems, verse out on a street corner, a public place where everybody can see it. So how is showing AVP without consent, how is that loving?
So I will quote my good friend and colleague, Devorah Gilman, who has a very concise quote that truth without love is ineffective, but love without truth, if we try to just pretty up the truth and cut the legs out from under it, is a lie. If we're not honest with people, if we're not actually trying to achieve the best for them, what do we mean by loving somebody? We mean trying to help them choose the highest good for themselves, what is going to benefit them and the people around them the most. And realizing that that is never what comes out of having an abortion. And so by loving people, we need to help them not choose abortion, not only for the sake of their child, but for the sake of themselves and the people around them. And so, I wish that we could wait in church basements and auditoriums and whatnot for people to come and seek out the truth about abortion. But we've been doing that for decades. We've been waiting for people to come to our presentations forever, and yet people don't want to, and that's nothing new. That's the same thing that every other social reform movement has done. And that's why we follow in the footsteps of them, by bringing it out on street corners and confronting um, Canadians who are old enough to have an abortion or influence others to have an abortion, that this is the truth of what is going on in Canada, that you could honestly say that the blood is on all of our hands, that this isn't something that, you know what, nobody needs to see this unless they're going to have an abortion. I think it's important to recognize that each and every one of us on this call and otherwise are pre-abortive, in that we could be involved in an abortion decision in the future. And so we absolutely need to know the truth of what abortion is going to do to an innocent human being.
So this question comes from Dylan. Do you think it's ethical to use posters that show photos of fetuses past 12 weeks when the overwhelming majority of abortions happen before 12 weeks? Is this not misleading?
So I think it's important to recognize that the vast majority of our photos do show preborn children in the first trimester, and also in that 8 to 12 week kind of zone where the majority of surgical abortions are being performed. It is true that we do show late term abortions, 20, 24 week abortions. And I think that's absolutely essential because they do still happen in Canada. We are honest in the conversations we're having. We're not trying to pretend that 90% of abortions happen when the child is viable or anything like that. But we have to compel Canadians to realize that we are the only democracy with no restrictions on abortion, no legal restrictions on abortion at all. And so while, yeah, there's only a couple hundred abortions that happen each year after 24 weeks, those are still happening. First of all, what would we say if there's a couple hundred born kids getting killed out of tax dollars every year with the permission of society and our government? So realizing that that is a reality in Canada, while also recognizing that what is the difference then between killing a child at 24 weeks or 18 weeks or 10 weeks or 6 weeks or even earlier? That show the evidence of what's happening, which is why the majority of our pictures do accurately show the 8 to 12 week abortion victims. But I think it's important for people to remember that we are not like the rest of the world. We are unique in our support of abortion, and the only company we have are North Korea and China when it comes to not having legal restrictions.
And another question here from Jennifer, and this is I would classify this as fairly pointed. So yeah. So let's get into it.
Totally.
Cam, do you really believe that these posters are worth potentially traumatizing the vulnerable individuals who view them?
So I do think it's important that we recognize that these can have a profound impact on those that view them. And that for many people, they're going to remind them of a traumatic experience that they've gone through. We recognize that nobody wants to have an abortion. There's a great quote, I forget who said it, but it's the quote that says, a woman wants an abortion, not like she wants an ice cream cone or a Porsche. A woman wants an abortion like an animal caught in a trap wants to gnaw off their own leg. We know that people don't want to have abortions. We know that the countless mothers and fathers who walk in our midst and have experienced abortion likely did it because they viewed it as their only or their best option. And we want to help them connect with the healing and help and support that is available, just like anyone else doing pro-life outreach, whether you're using abortion victim photography or not. What it comes down to is how committed are we to ending this going forward? If we recognize the absolute effectiveness that this has in changing people's minds, and if we realize that there's a huge number of abortions performed on mothers who have already had at least one abortion, we desperately need to reach everybody. Again, we are all pre-abortive in the impact that we can have on a future abortion decision. And so we need to reach out to people. We need to show the truth to people and help them navigate the emotions that come up based on their past experiences, based on the decisions they've made. And yet we wouldn't make that same assertion for other injustices. We don't say that for those who have lost, because there are those who have lost loved ones to car accidents, we're not going to show the images that Mothers Against Drunk Driving and Texting and Driving and Drinking and Driving and all these other campaigns show to convince people not to drink or text and drive. And so we need to help people navigate their experiences, and we have to help heal that trauma. But we don't do that by removing everything that may remind them of it. We do that by providing better quality and more accessible counseling and support.
And I appreciate that answer. I think I might even throw my hat into the ring in this regard a little bit, and simply, because it's a fairly pointed question. Is it worth traumatizing these vulnerable individuals? And this might be bad PR, but my answer is yes. We live in a culture where abortion takes place, and that's not okay. And these are the repercussions of a culture where abortion takes place: is that people have to see something that is happening, and abortion is happening, and therefore, this is what we have to do. And so. That might be bad PR, but that's kind of my response to that.
And a question that I often ask is whether people hold the same line. I mentioned some of the current campaigns that are using victim imagery. I wonder if people hold the same line for those who have used victim imagery in the past. I strongly encourage people on this call and otherwise to check out the images used during the civil rights movement, the images used to combat the refugee crisis in the Middle East, and other injustices, child labor, slavery, all sorts of injustices. And are we going to have the same approach when it comes to historic uses, that they should not have used victim imagery so as to end that injustice? And understand that we have to hold people to the standard. Sure, we name stadiums and we name roads and boulevards after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. now. But while he was alive and while he was advocating for the rights of Black Americans, that he was one of the most hated people in America, that effective social reformers are rarely liked, and liked social reformers are rarely effective. We have to put aside our personal reputations. We have to put aside the fact that, we're not going to make friends doing this. We're probably going to lose friends doing this, with an understanding that it's achieving a greater goal of protecting human rights.
Now, Cam, what about ultrasound images? And this question comes from Lily.
Say that again. Sorry, I missed that, Ben.
What about this question comes from Lily. What about ultrasound or 3D images of live fetuses? Can they be equally as effective as ABP?
I think that they can certainly be effective, especially when they're juxtaposed with the images of the victims of abortion. Part of the rationale is simply, again, looking at historic social reform, that do you convey the injustice of the Jim Crow laws and segregation and discrimination in the southern states by showing a picture of a happy African American family that is huddled around their Thanksgiving dinner? No, you show the atrocities perpetrated against them. You show the injustice that they're forced to endure by showing the violence that is perpetrated against them. You don't convey the horrors of the Holocaust by showing a picture of a happy Jewish family. You show the horrors of the Holocaust, and you achieve the never again commitment by showing the harsh reality of what happened. That I think there is value in that for sure. And yet I don't think that it conveys the full magnitude of the injustice. It's kind of that idea of, you may draw some people towards, oh, that's a very cute human being, we should appreciate them and love them more. But I don't think that it makes people aware of just how savage the situation is in Canada. That there are 300 babies who are ripped apart every day. And you can't convey that simply with an ultrasound image, just like you couldn't convey that in the past.
Now, of course, you've gone through the. Sorry, remind me of the project in Florida that you guys do. The name of
the Abortion Awareness Project.
Abortion Awareness Project. I can't believe I forgot that. But now, you would be doing that in Florida. You would be doing that here. Yep. Two different cultures. Yep. Is there a big difference in the response to those images in those two places?
I would say that there isn't much of a difference with regards to the acceptance of abortion. I'm not going to say that the universities that we've been on in the States are exceptionally pro-life, or that the universities we're on in Canada are exceptionally supportive of abortion. What I would say is the appreciation for freedom of speech and expression and the openness to conversation. That I've been down to Florida, 4 times now, and I've had thousands of conversations, and I think that in all of the thousands of conversations, I've had like 3 people tell me that I shouldn't be allowed to show the images. Everyone else just acknowledges them and engages directly and deals with them as evidence relevant to the debate. In Canada, obviously, they're working to cover it up, and I think that that's affirmed by the sentiments of so many abortion advocates that recognize that when abortion victims are seen, people change their mind. And so it doesn't come as any kind of surprise that people are working to censor the images. It doesn't come as any kind of surprise that they don't want us doing our projects and they don't want our projects being seen, because they realize that that's a huge threat to not only legal abortion access, but to their worldview of supporting abortion.
Now, what about BC and Alberta in terms of cultural differences there? Like any major difference that you saw in the response?
Not a ton in the response. Certainly, there's a legal difference with regards to activism on campus and whatnot. But I've done abortion victim photography displays on a half dozen, if not closer to a dozen campuses in both provinces, and generally speaking, you still have the same mix of demographic people who are willing to intellectually engage on the topic, realize, that is a human being that's relevant to the conversation. And those that don't want them to be seen realize just how damaging that is to the pro-abortion worldview, that it's really difficult to defend killing an innocent human being when you can see the human being that you're killing. That's why they want to keep it behind closed doors. That's why they want to continue this kind of masquerade of clouded rhetoric where there's lacking in clarity.
We have a Mark, and I'm going to do a little bit of interpretation here. The question is there an age limit with showing these images? And I assume that to mean, does CCBR, have any practices in terms of, here's the age that you have to be to attend activism, having these images in CCBR offices? Are you careful about where small kids go? Like, is there a protocol there?
So there's a ton of protocol, and there's honestly too much to go into in this call. I will say that when we're doing our activism, it doesn't make any sense, obviously, to go to a playground or a kindergarten or something like that. Like, that's not the audience that we're trying to reach. That's why so much of our time is spent on post-secondary campuses or secondary schools or busy downtown corridors where the absolute vast majority of people viewing our projects are going to be those who are old enough to have an abortion or old enough to influence somebody else to have an abortion. So that's our goal. When it comes to who participates in our projects, often we understand that there's some discretion to the parents, that if a parent wants to bring a kid to a presentation we're doing, we're not necessarily going to stop them at the door and force the kid out. If the parents want them in there, then by all means, we're not going to bar access. But we're also not going to trick people into bringing their kids out to a presentation and then show AVP when we lied about it not being there. We want to engage the focus audience of people who can have abortions or influence others. And if people outside of that audience are invited in, and the parents or guardians or whomever wants to invite them in, then we certainly aren't going to stop that from happening.
Now, a question that comes to my mind, and this comes out of an interaction that I had with a friend of mine as I was actually giving her a presentation on what NCLN does. Now, what she said, I think, was that at one point she was, subscribed to the CCBR newsletters. That she has had some kind of indirect experience with abortion, and so for that reason, she had to unsubscribe because she couldn't bear seeing the graphic images, knowing her experience with abortion. So, what's your response to that? And is there material that CCBR circulates, for those people so that they can sort of still be up to date and involved, but without having to look at those images?
So I would definitely point them towards the Bridgehead that my colleague and friend Jonathan Van Maren runs. Some of the articles may include images of us doing activism, but it's certainly not a core component, I don't think. You're not going to see it on the homepage, I don't think. And I would say that obviously there's a discretion for how actively we seek out this evidence. Like, I'm not saying that everybody has to go in and look at abortion images constantly. I'm not saying that we have to have this glued onto our background, to our laptops or anything. What I'm saying is that we need to be compelled to action, and we need to recognize the value of these images. And if we ourselves are not in a position to actively participate in displays because of our own personal experiences and emotional landscape and that sort of thing, then I respect that. I'm not going to try to guilt everybody into doing it all of the time. What I will say is that I hope that you'll still encourage and enable those around you to use these tools, because hopefully you're still set on the same commitment to make abortion unthinkable, to make abortion not happen in Canada. And so regardless of whether you are on the front lines holding the image or whether you are enabling others to do so because of your experience, I would say that there's multiple different roles within the movement, and that there's a place for you. There's a place for you in helping change minds and save lives.
Now, with the polling, you did touch on how CCR circulates postcards to different people, and of course that's one way to do outreach. And then the other way to do outreach is of course the activism with the images, but also with the dialogue. Do you find that one is more effective than the other, or is that not even a concern because they have different purposes?
So I would say they have the same purpose, obviously, the same ultimate purpose in changing minds and saving lives. I would say that I would love to have a conversation with every Canadian about abortion. And that's why we've implemented our door knocking project, where we go neighborhood by neighborhood, having conversations with people. I would say that, I mean, the importance for both our door knocking and our postcarding is the simple fact that not everybody goes to a public university or works downtown, and that we absolutely need to reach all Canadians who can be influential in this cause. And so we need to ensure that all those Canadians, all those homeowners are reached with this truth, and that we can't again wait for them to come downtown and see us, let alone come to our churches or our pro-life organization galas to learn the information. We need to bring that to them so that they have the information they need to make an informed and appropriate decision on challenging pregnancies.
Now, this is another pointed question, and I actually have a background in this. I used to be like a video journalist, not a good one, but I remember doing a story on Bridge City News on the Miracle Channel down in Lethbridge. Of course, in Lethbridge, there was that whole controversy about, you had the bus bench ads that Lethbridge Pro-Life was putting out. They weren't graphic even. They simply portrayed a fetus saying, whatever it said, abortion hurts or whatever it was. And there was an activist in Lethbridge who, because she had had miscarriages, she found those ads to be triggering in some way. Is that a concern for CCBR as you go downtown, as you obviously try to get as many views as possible? Is it a concern that maybe you'll unintentionally hurt somebody who has had an experience in any way with a fetus that did not survive to birth?
Obviously it's something that we need to be aware of, because there's so many people who have that experience, and that's why that's an integral part of our training for our volunteers, helping people understand how to communicate that on the street. That's why it's integral for the people who are answering the phone calls, whether you're calling in after seeing the truck or receiving a postcard, anything like that, having a conversation, helping people navigate their experiences. For sure, we certainly need to recognize that. We certainly need to be aware of it. Are we going to say that because these images are going to remind people of a terrible experience that they had, we're not going to show them because we care more about the feelings of born humans than the lives of preborn humans? I don't think it's a comparison or a competition between two people. I think that it's an unfortunate reality that we're having to face with regards to the emotional landscape and the livelihood of different human beings. It's not a matter of who's more important, but what right is more fundamental, what is the absolute urgency, and helping people understand that there's a fundamental difference between an elective abortion and a miscarriage. And many of the people who are actively involved in CCBR have had miscarriage experiences. And the reason why they're so active in the pro-life movement is because faced with that grief of having lost a child that they desperately wanted, they're appalled by the fact that there's other mothers or intentionally choosing to tear their children apart. And so I think that we definitely need to be clear in our messaging. We definitely need to be clear in what it is that we're communicating, and be aware of the experiences that those around us are having, and helping them navigate that while still embracing and sharing the truth. That way we can't compromise the truth. The fact that there are multiple victims of abortion, because there are multiple people impacted by abortion, doesn't mean that we need to stop or only focus on one of them. We need to focus on all of them, but we need to remember that at the end of the day, the person who is the greatest victim is that preborn child.
Now, what I want to touch on is, like, obviously there's the seeing of the images and there's the dialogue, and we're getting into the last 8 minutes here. So definitely, if anybody has one more question, we definitely want to see that from you. You talk about downtown. You talk about, obviously, not going close to kindergarten, locations and stuff like that. Is there a priority between dialogue and the seeing of the images, where maybe you would position yourself in a place where more dialogue could take place, or maybe you would position yourself in a place where there's more car traffic?
So we try to achieve both. Different projects are focused on that, and we realize that showing the images are going to get a lot of people part of the way there. It's going to get some people all of the way to accepting the pro-life worldview. It's going to get a lot of people a step closer to that. But we realize that conversations are often essential towards getting more and more people towards that conclusion. And so we need to get as many people as possible thinking about the injustice in the first place. For those who are active on campus or other communities and whatnot, you realize that oftentimes when we encounter people and challenge them on their perspective on abortion, they haven't really thought about it at all, let alone critically. And so we need to get people thinking about the issue of abortion. And that's why so many of our projects are geared towards efficiently exposing the truth about abortion to as many people as possible. And then coupling that as much as we can with conversations to kind of bring them the rest of the way towards understanding the whole worldview of the pro-life movement, I guess. And so it's kind of a both and, that we're not necessarily prioritizing one or the other. We realize the value of both, and we realize that the images are going to get people partway there, and they're going to stick with people for a long time. The conversations might move them in a more tailored and more personal capacity towards them personally accepting the pro-life movement. Pro-life worldview, I guess.
Right. Now, last question for you. It's a public one, and it comes from Marlon. It's a two-parter. So number one is CCBR still using their truck? I assume that means the truck with the graphic images on there. The second part of the question is there anything that CCR is doing that is getting any reactions or accusations of disrespecting social distancing?
So the first one, we have been driving the truck a little bit. We're still trying to feel out where people are at. Obviously, this is a pretty alarming time for everybody. There's a lot of concern and being overwhelmed with the entire situation. But we have to balance that with the understanding that abortions are still happening now. And not only that, but we're likely, unfortunately, going to be seeing a spike in abortions because of that uncertainty, because of that fear, because of the financial crunch that so many people are in. And so we have been driving the truck. We're exploring other options for outreach as much as we can. To the best of my knowledge, we haven't been accused or challenged of any problems for social distancing, because we've stopped all of the projects that are directly conversational in close proximity. And there's generally only one person driving the truck, so there's lots of room between that driver and anyone else driving on the road.
Now I'm going to ask you one more that came through, and then I'm going to let you. I'm going to get you to do a plug, and then we'll end the show there. So this is another one from Jennifer. CCBR claims to not plant themselves in areas where small children can see AVP, but there are documented cases of you doing so. So how do you respond to that?
I mean, I'd be interested in the documented cases. And certainly we're not above reproach. Like I will be honest that there have been times where we've been informed by people at Mount Royal University, for example. We do a lot of our outreach at Mount Royal University, and we've been told by students, hey, you know what, there's a kindergarten or there's a daycare facility that is down this wing of the university, and sometimes they come out for walks, and we've said, you know what, as soon as the kid's there, we angle the signs away. We make sure that we avoid the kids seeing it when we have the opportunity to do so. I mean, I know that there's a big case that people might be referring to in Calgary, where we were doing one of our choice gene displays at Queen Elizabeth High School in Calgary, and we were accused of being in the near proximity of an elementary school. The elementary school was behind the high school. and the lunch hours were at different times. We research when the lunch hours are going to be. We work hard to engage our target audience. And yeah, unfortunately, there are some occasions in which small children do see the images. I'll be the first to admit that we're not perfect in eliminating all occurrences. We work really hard to achieve that. We work really hard to achieve a very, very high majority of our focus audience, our target audience, seeing the images. And when a child does see the image, again, we have to ask that question of, bearing in mind that we've taken extraordinary steps to select our audience, do we care more of the feelings of born children or the lives of preborn children? Certainly we're caring about the feelings of born children by taking all of these steps to make sure that this rarely ever happens. And yet people need to dig a little bit deeper into some of the news stories that they read and realize that the high schools that we set up at, yes, there are often elementary schools a couple blocks away, but most elementary schools don't let their young children roam about the blocks around their school during the lunch hour. Most of them have duty teachers, and they're still playing tag and holding hands on the monkey bars and whatnot. So we're very intentional about the work that we're doing. And if anyone here has examples of times, then certainly we're always trying to improve our methods. And so if we're unaware of, you know what, secretly there's a daycare that isn't published online and we're not able to see, and we've been doing activism nearby, then we'll certainly make the adjustments that we can to ensure that our target audience is the one getting reached.
Well, and I certainly appreciate your comments about somebody saying we're not above reproach. You know,